Hi, my name is Cole, and I have a room full of lizards in my house. I'm even working towards building my very own reptile zoo. But today, for a bit of a change, I don't want to talk about me. Lord knows I do that enough. Today, I want to introduce you to all the incredible animals that I have the privilege to take care of. Now, I've been keeping reptiles for about 5 years now, and the very first snake that I ever brought home was this gal right here. This is my lovely lady Astrid, the plains or western hognose snake. This adorable species of snakes are kind of like the pugs of the reptile world, except they can breathe. But they're small, they're kind of dumb, and they have this smushed looking face. But if you look closely, you'll see that the reason why their face looks kind of smushed is because they have this hard, keratinous shovel on their nose. And they use that to dig. They use that to dig burrows for themselves to hide in, and they also use it to dig up their favorite food in the wild, which is toads. These guys are specialized toad eaters. One thing that's kind of hilarious about Astrid being my very first ever snake is that this snake is technically venomous. They've got a toxin in their saliva, it helps them digest toads. They are absolutely no threat to human beings, but it is kind of funny that my first pet snake was in fact a venomous one. The story behind how I got Astrid is kind of hilarious in 3 parts. The first of those parts is it was right around the start of the COVID pandemic, and me and my partner needed something that we could kind of pour ourselves into that felt productive. So we had decided on getting a pet. There was a bit of back and forth in terms of what sort of pet we were going to bring into our home. I, for the longest time, knew that I wanted to keep reptiles. My partner at the time was interested in the potential of keeping, well, a pet rat. Now, we had talked before that at some point I wanted to keep snakes, but that felt kind of like a distant prospect until we really got discussing it. And knowing my partner's affinity for all things adorable, I asked the question, well, have you ever heard of a hognose snake? And when she said no, we dove into YouTube. I showed her every clip and video possible that we could find of these adorable snakes, and she was sold pretty quickly. And we decided to bring a hognose snake into our life. But though I had spent a lot of time around the reptile hobby, I'd even worked in pet stores, and I had spent a lot of time researching the natural history of these snakes, well, I had never bought a snake before. I had never been to a reptile expo, at least not since I was 15, and I was really only there to meet Brian Barczyk. So I didn't really know what to look out for in terms of getting ripped off. So we went to our local reptile pet store who was affiliated with one of the local breeders who worked with hognose snakes, and we were absolutely dead set that we wanted something that was captive bred. What we didn't realize at the time is that we were paying about double what hognose snakes were technically worth at the time. Now, I don't have any regrets about this. I love Astrid to death and I wouldn't trade her for the world. It's just kind of funny how much we overpaid for this derpy little noodle. The final part of this story that makes Astrid kind of hilarious is that this snake almost caused my mother to disown me. Now, she got over it pretty quickly, but my mother is terrified of snakes, and it did cause a bit of a rift in our relationship for a short period of time when I told her that I was actually going forward with getting a pet snake. The reason I am as comfortable telling this story on YouTube as I am is because it has a happy ending. My mom is getting progressively more and more comfortable with the presence of these animals, going so far as to actually be in my reptile room from time to time. She hasn't held any of the snakes yet, but I think we're close. Now, I did mention that in the wild, hognose snakes prefer a diet of primarily toads. However, in captivity, they seem to absolutely thrive on a diet of primarily rodents. You can also pretty easily tell that Astrid here is a female given her colossal size. Female hognose snakes do get about double the size of the males, and sometimes they will turn their fiancé into an entree. This guy, on the other hand, takes forever to turn his entrees into poop. This is my friend Kvothe, and Kvothe is a blood python, a python bronger's mine. The main question I usually get about Kvothe is, how do you pronounce his name, and why did you name him that? Well, why did I name him that's pretty easy. Kvothe is named after the main character of my favorite book of all time, The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, and the main character's name is Kvothe. It's pronounced kind of like Quoth, like Quoth the Raven, but with a V kind of wedged in there. Kvothe. If you don't know how to say it, that's totally fine. It's not a big deal. Kvothe was my second pet snake, and the first snake that I got to check off my dream pet list. I have a written list of all the species that I would love to work with one day. I'll probably share it in a future video. And the short-tail python complex have always been some of my favorite snakes on the planet. I find them absolutely fascinating. They are super intelligent living landmines. They will sit and wait buried in the leaf litter in the jungles of southeastern Asia, waiting for food to walk by. And they have absolutely remarkably fast strike speeds, especially for a non-venomous snake. But what's the deal with that poop thing that I mentioned before? Well, the short-tailed pythons will actually store poop in the back half of their body to act as an anchor for catching prey. Because these snakes are not very fast, they can't chase their prey down, they really can't let that prey go once they've caught it. So they use the weight of that anchor as leverage to hold on and not let their prey escape. And this is a blessing and a curse as a keeper. That means I don't often have to clean Kvothe's poop. But when I do, it is 6 to 12 months worth of poop in a singular bowel movement, which is unpleasant to say the least. The first thing that many people will tell you when they talk about blood pythons and other short-tailed pythons is that they are mean, they're bitey, they're unpredictable. And Kvothe is lovely. He's very, very sweet. But why does everyone say that blood pythons are bitey and feisty? And the truth is that a lot of them are. And the reason for this is that their anxiety is exactly what keeps them alive in the wild. This is a slow-moving, heavy-bodied snake that lives in the jungle. They can't climb very well, and unlike the hognose snake, they can't really burrow to protect themselves. They just kind of hide under the leaves. So if there is an animal that is threatening a blood python, their only form of self-defense is that strike. And it is fast and it's scary, but it probably won't actually harm the animal. It just has to act as a deterrent more than an actual cause of injury. So the real key to making sure that Kvothe doesn't bite me is just not ever posing a threat to Kvothe. I never come at him from above, and I try to avoid any fast or jerky movements when I'm around this snake. I just let him use his curious, inquisitive nature to explore the world around him, and I just become part of that world for him. Whereas the key to making this snake not want to bite me is just not being her food. This is my lovely friend Urza, the Suriname locality boa constrictor. Scientific name, boa constrictor. Boa constrictor is not as popular in the hobby as their close relatives, the boa imperator, sometimes referred to as the Colombian red-tailed boa. An easy way you can differentiate them is that the boa constrictor truly has this beautiful maroon red tail, which still varies depending on locality. Boa constrictors, at least by name, are one of the most famous snakes on the planet, up there with king cobras and pythons, which the general public seems to think is just one species. Boa constrictors are absolutely stunning snakes found in the Amazon rainforests of South America. Particularly, the boa constrictor, as opposed to the boa imperator, is found within the Amazon basin. They are phenomenal swimmers, phenomenal climbers, and they have absolutely fantastic camouflage. They are huge and they are strong, though they are not nearly as huge or as strong as the general public seems to assume that they are. Part of what makes me love boa constrictors so much is they are generally very docile. Urza is, in many ways, the typical boa constrictor. She is curious, she is methodical in the way that she moves, and she's not particularly flighty or scared of people. Urza is, by most metrics, my favorite snake to handle and interact with. She is also the snake that I trust the most to hand to kids or non-snake people when they come over and have questions about my snakes. I know that I can trust her not to hurt anybody, and I also know that she is big and strong enough that even if someone has no experience handling snakes, she can just sort of hold on to them, and it is unlikely that a child is going to hurt a snake of this size. Now, Urza is still quite young. She's only about 4 years old, and she's going to get much, much larger, so she takes up the most space of any of the snakes that I keep. Now, I did make note that the way I avoid a bite from a boa constrictor is just by not being food. That's because boas have an incredibly strong food drive. When food is in the area, that is all they focus on and it's all they think about. So an important thing to consider when thinking about getting a pet boa constrictor is tap training. All tap training is just giving the snake a nudge somewhere on their body with something that isn't your hands so that they know it's not feeding time. As you can see, as soon as Urza figures out that I'm not food, she is nothing but an absolute delight to interact with. Urza is probably a face that you're going to get very used to on this channel, as due to how easy she is to handle, I will likely film a lot of my videos with her as my co-host. This guy, on the other hand, is probably the most difficult snake that I have to film with. This is my friend Kaz, the yellowtail Cribo, the Drymarchon cora. These beautiful snakes, much like the boa constrictor, are large snakes that are found in South America, especially in the Amazon rainforest, though they do have a little bit more of a northern range into Central America. But that is pretty well where the similarities stop between the Cribo and the boa constrictor. This is a slim, fast, athletic pursuit predator in contrast to the boa constrictor being primarily an ambush predator. The Drymarchon are some of the largest colubrid snakes on the entire planet. And they're weird. They don't have any venom and they don't constrict their prey. They just bite harder than most other snakes their size, allowing them to hold on to their prey while they swallow them whole using just the strength of their jaw. This leads them to eat smaller prey items than most other snakes their size, leading them to eat more often than most other snakes their size. And that also means that they poop a lot more often than other snakes their size. And they use that poop not like an anchor the way a blood python does, but instead to paint walls. That's right, these guys can spray their poop very similar to the way a cobra can spray their poop. I'm kind of lucky in that Kaz seems to prefer to poop almost exclusively in his water bowl, and yes, that is absolutely gross, but it's pretty easy to clean. It's just one of the unique challenges in keeping a Cribo that reminds me a lot more of keeping a fast-moving carnivorous lizard than it does keeping a snake. They eat and poop more regularly, so I do have to clean up after Kaz more often than I clean up after most of my snakes. But the other thing is that these snakes are incredibly intelligent. They need a higher level of mental stimulation to keep them from getting bored than do most other reptiles, outside of like crocodilians and birds. So things like puzzle toys and tap training are crucial to keeping a Cribo well. This lovely little lizard is Magnus, the Saharan Euromastix. And Magnus is particularly weird in my collection for a couple different reasons. The first is going to be pretty obvious. He's not a snake. He has legs, visible legs, and this crazy spiky tail. Magnus is currently my only non-snake lizard. But he is also odd in the fact that this lizard, in comparison to the last few animals that I showed you, comes from a very, very different climate and therefore has very different care requirements than those other reptiles. Kvothe, Urza, and Kaz all come from tropical or subtropical rainforests, whereas Magnus, the Saharan Euromastix, comes from northern Africa in the scorching hot, incredibly dry desert. And while those animals will spend their time hiding under leaf litter and up in the trees, Magnus instead prefers to wedge himself between rock crevices and bury himself under the sand. Even Magnus's diet is bizarre compared to the other animals that I keep. All of my other pets are carnivores, whereas the Euromastix is a largely herbivorous lizard, meaning he pretty much only eats plants, though I do make sure to occasionally give him the opportunity to feed on insects. Magnus, much like Kaz, is a very active diurnal lizard. They are very curious and they spend a lot of their energy during the day. Difference being is that Magnus has a little bit more attitude, giving me his aggressive belly dancing and even the occasional tail. But it kind of makes sense. I have not had Magnus since he was a baby. In fact, I just adopted him a few weeks ago. He came from a local zoo that reached out mentioning that they were looking to rehome him, and I have wanted a Euromastix since I was very, very young, since I first worked with one when I volunteered at a pet store while I was in high school. I fell in love with them then, and I absolutely jumped at the opportunity to finally keep one of my own. Part of the reason why I didn't already have a Euromastix was it's incredibly rare here in Canada to find captive bred specimens, and I do everything in my power to make sure that the animals that I bring into my home come from reputable breeders. Magnus is an 8-year-old Euromastix, and I am so excited to watch him continue to grow more comfortable with me as I continue to improve his care. This is a dog. Have a great day.